Okay, we're recording now. So anything you say can and will be held against you in a court of public opinion and beyond. Okay, I think we're good here. There's a little glare. I'm trying to remove that. Okay, that's all good. All right, so here we're going to refine a little bit more. Do you remember last semester we just sort of did blanket first inversion course? Let me just remind you. I know that a couple of you heard me do the same thing last week on Wednesday, right? So I'm just going to do a very, very, very brief review. Here is where we finished the semester. In C major or C minor, doesn't really hear C minor, right? But C major is just as good. We always, in our way of doing things in this school, we're usually really comparing major and minor of the same key, what is also known as parallel major and minor, C major, C minor, because they have sort of more in common in certain ways than, say, C major and A minor. You know, because they're relative major and minor. They share the same key signature, as does B major and G sharp minor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's a better comparison in some ways. Here's a root position chord. We understand that very well. And here's where we left off, a first inversion chord. So I'm just going to say first inversion here. Okay? That we understand very well. And we understand that this note here, the root of the chord, or the lowest note, also called the bass, is now the top note. And that means that the chordal third, this one here, that's the chordal third, root third, fifth, is in the bass. The root of the chord is still C. We understand that very well. But we also understand that in terms of inversion, we've only inverted really one voice, the bass. So I'm going to refine this a little bit and be able to see that we've actually inverted both outer voices, because this this stack of thirds here leaves the chordal fifth as the top of the chord. And when we're in a maybe later on this semester, when we begin to write progressions, you know, chord progressions that are a little longer, we need a little more flexibility than we have here. So I'm going to erase this, and I'm going to refine this a little bit and say, if I have a root position triad, oops, I'm messing this up. I only had one cup of coffee this morning. That's my excuse. I'm going to stick to it, right? So I'm going to take the chord. So there's the chordal root. We understand that. I'm going to take the chordal third and put it on top. Because when I invert this, I'm going to do this, right? We understand now that I'm inverting what before was down is now up. And I want to be able to make the same gesture with the top voice. So now both voices have been inverted, meaning flipped upside down. That's also what we call voice exchange. My pen is running out.
Professor?
Yes, Preach.
So with the side that you had the root on, the left side.
Yep.
If you wrote that as a triad, would it still be just G? So you would write it spread out.
I would write it like this.
Is that not an inversion?
Nope.
In itself?
So there are two things that we have to keep track of here. That is a very good question. But in both cases, the chordal fifth would be the sort of glue in between. Do you understand? There will be the middle voice. And the way to sort of negotiate this on the keyboard is that you take this with your left hand and these two notes here with your right hand, right? Inversion, Christian, it has to do with the bass only. Whatever goes on top of the bass is called voicing. So I can voice the chords differently. So this, sorry, that's a bad bracket. This would be voicing. And same thing here, right?
So, but all three of those notes on the right would be.
It's inverted because,
Okay.
yeah, because I have the chordal third in the bass. Inversion means the whatever you have in the bass. There are two things that yeah? Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So there are two. So whatever voices we have on top of the bass, we can refer to as the design of the sound, right?
So it's just a design and not an inversion?
Say that again?
So it's just a stylistic design and not an inversion?
Yes, exactly. Okay. Let me talk about, okay, so let me erase this and talk about two things, and then I'll come back to this again, right? Because I only have one board. I'll erase it, I'll remember what it is, and I'll come back to it. Okay, cool? Very good. And thanks for being in with your picture. Sometimes when I'm in meetings, I put my screenshot on as well. But it is better and it's more efficient in a way because I can see by your demeanor if this is going in or not, right? And so that helps me not to waste any time and repeat. Sometimes repetition is a good thing though, because we do need to hear things a couple of times before they really sink in. So I'm going to talk about two things. Oops, this is also running out now. Running low on supply here because there's nobody in the building, right? Whoops. So if I need new supply, I sort of have to think ahead of the game. So I'm usually pretty good at. So I'm going to talk about two things: structure and design. Okay, so these are two different things. They overlap to a certain extent. We understand that they overlap. And they intersect in many ways, but they are fundamentally different. Let's say, for instance, give me an example of something that is design.
Like wallpaper.
Wallpaper, very good. It doesn't hold the building up. We can agree on that. If you change the wallpaper, it doesn't really change the structure of the function of the wall, right? It just decorates it. Another one is clothing, right? I mean, basically, I think I spoke about this last semester because it's an easy to understand analogy that there are two reasons for wearing clothes. First of all, you know, on a day like this, we're less cold when we wear clothes, right? And sometimes we wear a lot of it because it's very cold. New York is very cold. So that's one function of clothing. Then there's a cultural issue with clothing that if we walked around naked, you know, that's not part of our current culture. You know, so there's a modesty / morality / religion aspect to this. But basically, if I wear all black clothing, it's going to keep me just as warm as if I wore all yellow clothing, right? You know, we understand that changing the design of my clothing or the style of clothing is really not going to have an influence on the basic function of clothing, you know. And as far as all the cultural / modesty concerns, it covers up my body. So if you don't want to see my privates, then you know, wearing yellow clothing or hippie clothing or whatever serves the same function. It doesn't really change the basic skill of clothing and the reasons why we wear it. But for instance, if we go back to the wallpaper analogy, as Lauren mentioned there, if I break down the wall, say I don't like the looks of this wall, you know, I mean, this is my wall, right? It separates the two rooms. If I say, look, I just want more space, I'm going to break down the wall, that's a decision that has some consequences. Obviously, the person with the office next door would not be particularly happy. But also, structurally speaking, the other function of the wall is also to hold up the roof or the ceiling, right? It divides the building into several stories. We understand that. And if I change the design of the wallpaper, or I painted green or whatever, that wall, it would not interfere with the function of it. It still holds up the ceiling very nicely, and it divides the room, the two offices. And same thing here, if I change the upper voices in a chord, the fundamental structure of the chord is really not affected. But if let me give you an example of this, because there's a very, very easy example. I just got to change view a little bit. Just give me a second here. And I'm going to bring out my guitar. Just bear with me for a second. Okay, so I will play upon my guitar. I'll play you a little tune that you all know. Once I get it in tune. So if I play, we all know where this is beginning and ending, etc. And I can very quickly. Here I have a root position chord, and here I have a first inversion chord. We have no problem relating those two sounds to one another. They're actually very, very easy to relate. And I can, if I manipulate the voices a little bit, I can end my song. We still hear that as a completion of some harmonic progression, right? Because I've made the voices work that way. But in fact, what I've done here, I'm now ending in first inversion. But I cannot at all. I cannot end with that one, for instance. That's the same chord, but it has the wrong bass. So the bass is the foundation. That's the structure of the chord. Do you understand? That's, yeah. Preach, come.
So you can't end with a G bass.
Right.
You end with an E bass.
Yep, you can. That's exactly right. I mean, you can. It's not it's not as complete. If we can relate this sound to this one, not a problem, right? That's not a problem. But if I play the G in the bass, that sound relates to this one here. You see?
So it sounds more like the 5 as opposed to resolving.
Exactly. So this one here, if I have the G in the bass, has to go through a 2-step sort of resolution. There's the resolution to that chord. This chord here relates to this one. And it now goes to, do you see, there's a certain logic about this. There's a certain hierarchy that says who, right? Is this culturally determined, or is that just something that our ear knows already? Well, that's a very, very good discussion. That is actually a discussion that everyone is having at this moment. What is the hierarchy in music? What is that reflection on? I don't want to go too deeply into it right now, but all I'm saying is that that is the hotly debated topic, right? All I know is that if I take a poll of a whole bunch of students in my class and I say, does this sound finished? Then 100% of them will say, no, it doesn't sound finished. Does this sound finished? 100% of my students will say that sounds finished, and I can say that that's a completion of a musical progression that I may not be able to name all the parts of it, but that doesn't really matter. I understand that has come full circle. The same thing with language. The same thing with language. Because I'm a foreigner, how do you know that in an instant? In a split second, you know I'm a foreigner from the way I speak English. You know, I just know that that's the reaction, because I've lived there for 32 years. I speak the language very well. It's not a qualitative judgment, and it's not something that I'm uncomfortable with anymore. But it's something that I've come to take for granted, that people, as soon as they meet me, the first thing they know about me is that I'm not from here, because I sound different to somebody who grew up in New York. You know, although I sound increasingly like somebody who's lived there for a long time, but I will never be a native New Yorker, right? So we just know that. And also sometimes I get the reaction that you don't look like an American or whatever Americans are supposed to look like. I mean, as a New Yorker, that's a funny one, right? Because we come in all shapes and sizes and colors and variations, right? And most of them are mixed in with one another. So I don't know what that's supposed to mean, that you don't look like an American. Well, what kind of American do I not look like? So I sort of spit that back at people when I hear that. But my point is that regardless of how we may feel about music, and regardless of the opinions we might hold about the hierarchy in music, I can tell you that 100% of my students will know that if I play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and if I do that, I may have the right melody note, but since the bass, i.e. the foundation, the structure of the chord is quote unquote wrong or unexpected, I can't get away with that and say that's the end of my song, because the ear won't have it. And you can now have further, opinions about that. Oh, it's because people have been, acculturated, or their culture has been stolen, and we've all been misappropriated and horribly abused by music history. And that may all be true. I don't know about that. All I know is that we all hear that that sounds as if you come around full circle.
Professor.
Yeah.
I have a question. So
yeah.
I don't really know how I phrase this, but is it also, because you're saying that like we automatically have that, like we know that it's not complete.
Mm-hmm.
But would that apply to a song that's not as widely known? Because I feel like this song is also so known, like it's a part of your culture. Like,
yeah,
just know like how the song sounds, so you know when it's not
right.
But would that apply to a song that you don't know? Like,
yeah, that's an excellent question, right? I mean, the fact is that there are a million songs that are actually structured the same way as Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, right? Harmonically speaking, they might have different melodies and all that. And hold on a second, my phone is ringing. Let me just get rid of that. That was easy. And that, there is no hard and fast answer to that, Angelica. It is really very much a question of debate, right? And it's not just a question of music theory any longer. It's also a question of neuroscience. How does the brain process information, basically, right? And how does the brain process sound information? And a lot of it we don't really know. I mean, again, back to the language thing, because music is a language, right? That we've heard that, and it's a cliche, but there may be more truth to it than we care to map out. Back to the language, it's not easy to map out, you, meaning me, you sound like a foreigner because you say this sound differently, right? It's very difficult to map out, because usually I don't have a problem with people I don't know understanding what I'm saying. It's not that I speak unintelligible English. I mean, I sometimes do, but it's not because I'm a foreigner. That's just because, that's the end of my brain capacity or whatever. You understand? So it's more difficult to map out. Yeah, it's because you're playing a G and you're playing that louder than the other notes or whatever. It's more difficult. All I can say is the same as the judge said when he had a case that was brought to court, a pornography case. Is this pornography or if it's not? It said, well, I know it when I see it. I don't know if you remember that. It became a sort of a no-nonsense, sort of commonsensical answer that we know it when we see it. I know you're a foreigner because I can hear it when you speak. And there are not many Americans that are called Lars, right? And those who are, are usually born somewhere else. They're not born in America, right? Although actually, if I look up my own name, there are plenty of Lars Fransons in New York City, by the way. But relatively fewer than John Smith, right? There'll be quite a lot of John Smith or Justin, whatever, Kevin, somebody. So there's a certain built-in expectation that is regardless of, because let's say I take the melody somewhat out. If I can change the melody, right? But we still hear this as finished because I've concluded the cycle that even if I change the melody or whatever, the melody is really not the most important thing. That is, after all, decoration. You can hear a bunch of pop songs that have the same chord scheme, right, or chord sequence. I mean, if you care to analyze any number of sort of current pop songs, you'll find that the underlying harmonic sequences are very, very, very similar, if not completely identical. The only thing that's been changed is the styling of the clothing. In other words, the melody, right? So that which catches you most up front turns out to be not the most important thing. And I think there's a certain reflection in that. I mean, like when I meet new people, for instance, the first thing, or at least in New York, the first thing people know about me when they see me is that I'm white, right? Because they can see that. I have the facial features and I have the skin color of a white person, so therefore he's white. Right? Do you understand? And you are sort of have the same experience, I'm sure, that the first thing people know about you is how you appear, right? We can't, on the surface, see if people are related, because you would need a deeper test than that. You need ultimately a DNA test, right, to determine how closely people are related, because the surface will not reveal that in and of itself. And the same thing with the music here is that the surface of the music is probably the melody or the upper voices, right? Because all of them are less important than the structure in order for our understanding of it, right? Do you see what I mean? That, for instance, as I said, I have no problem relating these two chords to one another. And I can even change the melody. I can do that very easily, and there's not a problem. But the moment I enter the fifth scale degree in the bass, that one pulls in this direction. It just does. Says who? Says our ear. And is that culture determined? Well, that's sort of a decision for you to make. But it's an incredibly interesting area of study. And I can tell you that it is at the moment the most hotly debated topic in all of music academia. Because without, again, going to, without losing track of this stuff, because we got to go back to it, there are certain theories out there. They're more than theories. There's sort of a certain mapping out of the history of music theory that posits, and I think rightly, we can't really escape this as a fact, is that at certain points in music history, some of the theories of how music behaves were tied into certain views on the nature of culture, the nature of race, the nature of humankind, basically. And there are certain people, certain scholars, and some of them are incredibly smart and and very knowledgeable. They're tying this stuff into a hotly debated topic at the moment. Is music theory articulating a worldview that claims that whites are superior in race to other races? In other words, white supremacy theories. And I just want to leave it open because it's more a topic that Professor Carlos is dealing with in music history, but it's an inescapable topic that we need to talk about because it is undeniably true that some of the theorists that we are studying and whose theories we are using to explain music had those views. They held such views that music theory articulated certain cultural superiorities of certain cultures, you know, and suppressed those of others. I personally think that's complete rubbish, but that's that's just me, because I think music is beyond what we think about it. Music is a sort of it's like the force, the force of gravity, right? I mean, we can't really say that it doesn't exist just because we don't like it. You know, I mean, there's a certain natural force, and I hear music as something that is beyond those who put notes together. In other words, I don't think the act of putting notes together is culture. Just like cooking, for instance, is an aspect of culture, you see. I think the origin of music is in nature itself. And of course, if you're religious, you would say that it's created by God, right? So music is not something that we've invented. Music is a tool for expressing ourselves. But in doing so, it's no more ours, meaning us, those of us who put notes together and play them or whatever. It doesn't really belong to us, but it's a force that we can study objectively, I think, in nature as well. So you can posit another theory that all of this has nothing to do with my opinions about it, but it has all to do with the way that certain frequencies are intermingling with one another. And I can tell you, here's my guitar again. It's actually a good weapon of choice here. Because if I, let's say, if I divide my string, any string, and on any instrument, if I divide that into two halves, I'm just putting my finger very lightly on here, I get the octave. That's not something that I've invented. It's not something that's built into this particular guitar or the guitar as an instrument. That is just a natural phenomenon. You get the same on a violin. You actually get the same in a bottle. If you blow into a bottle, right, you get a sound. That's the sound of the entire length of the bottle. I mean, that column of sound. If you blow a little bit harder, you'll get the octave. The way the voice works as well. So this is half the column. And now Preacher's taking the space there.
What fret did you hit? Because I want to try it.
12. Yeah, the 12th fret.
The octave?
Yeah, the octave. Yeah. You see that?
I know you have harmonics, like.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you could hear all the strings, you know, all the open strings, where I'm just touching. Yeah, I'm not really holding down the string. I'm not stopping the string as such, right? But I'm just holding my finger very lightly here, and I'm getting that. That's not something that I've created. That's something that is in the nature of any string that's vibrating. So that's a natural phenomenon, or created by God, whichever model works. It's one and the same thing, really. We are talking about the same thing. What I'm talking about is that it's not something that I've invented. I mean, I can have an opinion about it, that I like this sound better than that or whatever. That's your opinion. That has nothing to do with fact. That's just an opinion. But so here it is, that if I divide this string length into half its length, I get that. So that will be the fifth, right? That will be the fifth of the string. So my point is here, and the point of everyone who studied this, is that fifth and octaves and further subdivide, because I can keep subdividing my string length and I get different overtones, that's what they're called, are natural phenomenons. And simply put, if I put the second overtone in the bass, the chord ceases to be of the same variety as this one here, or this one. But this one here must move there and then be resolved there. That's not just an opinion, and it's not just a matter of culture and a matter of having heard it enough times or whatever, because we can say, okay, I've heard it enough times, but where's your imagination, right? I mean, there must be so many people who've heard Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and who can imagine a different outcome. And yet 100% of the people in a classroom would say it's more likely that this chord belongs, or that the cycle of harmonic progressions is completed in the root position chord than in any other type of chord. It feels more complete. Not that the other ones are less good. That's not what it means. It just means that they're less complete to the ear. Again, I know it when I see it, as the judge famously said. And you got to know, I mean, you probably already know this about me. I'm less of a music academic than a practical musician, because I think I do find this incredibly fascinating, and I understand very well that people are writing big articles and claiming that that if you end in a root position chord, then you're subscribing to white supremacist ideas. I think, frankly, I think that's a complete stretch, right? Does that mean that all my black students are also also succumbing to white supremacist ideas just because they hear it the same way? Of course not. Well, of course not, right? I mean, my point is that it's a bit of it's an overstatement, and it's one where you want to force the evidence to suit your theory. So you're putting the cart before the horse, in my opinion. But I'm not taking away from the discussion. I think the discussion is a necessary one. I'm not afraid of the discussion, in other words, right? Because frankly, I don't hold the opinion that white people are superior to any other persons, right? I mean, I'm a white guy. I know a whole bunch of white guys. I grew up with them, right? When and where I grew up, there were really only white people, right? They come in all shapes and forms. Some of them are completely stupid, right? And they're not all superior. I mean, I don't really understand where that idea originated. You know, it must originate with people who are incredibly, you know, uncertain of who they are. But I, you know, I can say that as somebody who didn't grow up here, where the where I grew up, or I mean, 50 years ago, you know, there were only white people, and all the same thing that I hear people talk about, spewing off that this group is so and so and so. We had all the same arguments, just with different people where I grew up, and they're all white. So I mean, there must be something not matching up here, right? All the things that we're projecting onto Hispanics or black people or Chinese people or brown people or whatever, or Mexicans, right? All these sort of ideas, I said I've heard them before, but where I come from, it's that group who are now being portrayed as having these values or deficiencies or whatever. They can't both be true. I mean, there's obviously something flawed, deeply flawed with the argument itself. To me, you don't have to subscribe to my ideas. I'm just presenting my perspective, and I'm willing to entertain, although I think the discussion is a little bit, it's long-winded. I mean, look at how much time I've spent on it right now. I'm not saying it's not an interesting discussion. All I'm saying is that it's in the way of actually learning how to write music. Because I think most people, at the end of the day, just want to have the professional skills so they can express whatever they want to express. That's kind of where I'm coming from with this. Again, I know it when I see it, and I also know it when I don't see it. You know, that if you want to present the case of pornography to me and it's not pornography, then I'm not going to call it pornography. If you're going to present some incredibly elaborate theory that music theory is designed to make you subscribe to white supremacist ideas, then no, I'm not buying that, because I know that my strings tell me something different, and I know that my students tell me something different, because they're all hearing it more or less the same way, not entirely the same way, right? I mean, there's some variations, you know. I mean, not everyone can agree what my accent sounds like. They just know it's not American, right? But I hear all day long, I hear everything. Are you from South Africa? Are you British? Are you from Belgium? Or, I know what you are, right? You're so-and-so, and you lived here for this length of time, and then you moved, you know, it's like, okay, I'll take it, whatever. You're not going to get this right. My daughter, by the way, has the same problem because she's biracial. She hears everything all day long. When she's up in my neighborhood, because I live in a Hispanic neighborhood, she looks Hispanic. Her mom is Indian, but was born in Guyana in South America. So she's Caribbean. And her father obviously is a white dude, right? So she mixes in ways that people would interpret exactly with their own prejudice. Up in my neighborhood, everyone speaks Spanish to Isabella. Also because her name is Isabella, right? You know, so they would assume that she's Spanish. Now she happens to speak Spanish very well because she has it in school. But she's not Hispanic. But the funny thing is that nobody can get it right. And nobody would ever be able to put the right mix together. It's not that they're wrong in their opinion. And very, very few people are insulting in their sort of guess, right? The same with me. It's not, I don't perceive it as an insult to say, oh, you're not American. Well, thank you very much. I mean, it's not, it doesn't mean anything to me because there's an awful lot of non-Americans in New York City. You know, I mean, if you took a poll of our students in the classroom, there'll probably be a whole bunch of people who come from different places and who somehow find their home in New York City, right? And then at a certain point, we all become New Yorkers. I know it's not as simple as that, but you get the point, though, that there's a certain meeting point where and the meeting point for us is music, right? So let's get on with it. This is one of the reasons why I happily leave these things. Not that I'm not interested, as you can tell, and it's personal for me. It's not that I'm not interested. It's just that I feel these discussions, they sort of end up in a blind alley for me because you can't really resolve the issues and say, okay, it's like this then. So therefore, I'm very happy to leave it to those who have, you know, much better education than I do, and have studied this. I mean, musicology, at least ethnomusicology, as if there's a difference, right? It's so funny, you know, if you're a musicologist, then it's assumed that you study Beethoven and Bach and whatever. And if you're an ethnomusicology person, then you study music that is not Beethoven and Bach and all that. Why isn't it all ethnomusicology? I just don't understand the distinction, right? Yeah. Speak up, Lauren. I want to hear
No,
what you
I do agree. I think it goes back to even when you said like, does this sound complete or does this sound complete? It's like, I think personally, in my opinion, depending on where you grow up, like geographically, and then the ethnical cultures around that area, like you may hear a note or a chord progression different than somebody else.
Yeah.
Where like for you that chord progression sounds complete, but then in another culture, if you just add maybe like 2 other notes at the end, it can go into a whole different thing.
Right.
And so I think it's interesting that you brought up the whole like studying the Bach and Beethoven, and that's considered studying what is it, musicology?
Musicology. Music
And then anybody that's not white, it's like ethnic musicology. Like that makes no sense.
Same with restaurants, right? If you go to an ethnic restaurant.
Exactly. Exactly.
What does that mean? What does that mean? I don't get it. Preach. Speak up, man.
I just wanted to piggyback off of what Lauren was saying because I mean if you play a chord like
Yeah.
like to somebody that might be I don't know, a diminished chord or but to somebody like me, that just sounds really churchy. Because like you have you know, or like that's just it's culturalistic because it's the environment.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. That culture plays a huge role in this, how we perceive things. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so let's crack on with this stuff here. But I mean, again, as I said, it's interesting to me that like the restaurant analogy. If you go to an ethnic restaurant, first of all, I'm never really, or a fusion restaurant, right? Right? Asian fusion. You've probably seen, restaurants that build themselves as here's a Mexican roll in a Japanese restaurant, right? Because you take certain spices that are associated with Mexico or the new Latin America, whatever. It's no longer new. I mean, it's been around for a
burger
while.
egg roll.
Yeah, exactly, right. So I don't know. I have my own views on that, and sometimes I'm scolded for being too natural about this. I mean, my life is very blended. I must admit, on a day-to-day, I'm not hyper aware of some of these issues that I can see my colleagues who are teaching in Virginia or Kentucky or whatever. They have a very, very different take on this stuff, and they're always worried about, oh, have I been inclusive enough? And I just had an exchange with a colleague today. I said inclusion and diversity and all that very often means in music academia means that, oh, look, our Black students are playing Chopin too, which I find incredibly insulting. I mean, I just find it incredibly insulting that people will say, look, we're diverse because our Black students are playing Chopin as well. To a New Yorker, that statement is just so flawed on so many levels, right? That I can't even begin to unpack that, but it's in the language, right? If you're an ethnomusicologist, then you know stuff about non-white music. And if you're a musicologist, you just know things. I mean, I don't know any classical musicians nowadays who just play Bach and Beethoven. I mean, they're going to make a living as well, right? I mean, for Christ's sake, most of my friends who I went to conservatory with, they will take any and all gigs and they'll play any and all music they can, right? They're very good at playing the instruments, right? But a good many of them have or are working on Broadway. I mean, nowadays nobody's working on Broadway, right? And I remember, like 30 years ago, it was almost like an insult to say, yeah, I played a Broadway gig last week because it pays really well and I've got to pay my rent. Now people would kill to have a Broadway gig. So I don't know why people get off this. Sometimes I see some guys who have YouTube channels with millions of followers who would say, oh, this guy's a classical musician, meaning that, first of all, he can't have any rhythm then. That's a no-no, that if you're trained in a classical conservatory, then first of all, you have no groove. You don't know what that means. And secondly, you only play Bach and Beethoven and Chopin. I mean, that's rubbish. I mean, there's nobody in any center in the universe who is that confined. I mean, okay, if let's say you're a violin player with the New York Phil, then you won't play a whole bunch of bebop, right? I understand that's your own choice if you do that. But most people who are not in positions like that, they'll play any and all things that pays. Preach.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie. I kind of believe that, like the stereotype.
Yeah.
Because I believed it past tense. I mean, at least until I got here.
What made you change your mind then? What made you change your mind?
Chris Hughes.
Yeah, I mean, so reality, in other words, right?
Because like Chris can play anything, any and everything. I thought I played a lot of instruments.
Yeah.
No.
Right.
I play by ear 5 instruments. He plays by ear and reads like 9 of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's impressive.
and then on top of that, if you see him sit behind a drum kit, he's just going at it. So it's like,
yeah,
I'm like, that's different, because before all I saw were classical musicians and they had no feel. They had no feel, no groove. If you stuck them in a random situation, they were lost. And it's like, I can't tell you what to play if I'm over here grooving with the rest of the guys, bro. Right. You got to do your thing. But it's
but I mean, I've been subjected to that prejudice myself many, I mean, countless times, right? I mean, when we did in the Heights, for instance, it was assumed that I couldn't play the guitar part there. I mean, you know, it was just a priori assumed. And that, of course, since I was a classical guitarist, which, by the way, if you, let's say you grew up in Brazil, right, it would just be the guitar. It would not be called the classical guitar. I mean, it wouldn't be called the guitar, but it's called the violão, right? But I mean, there would just be that guitar. That's the guitar you play. And you play your bossa nova, you play your everything, you play all your groovy music on that guitar the same as you play Bach. You know, I mean, there wouldn't be this distinction that we feel the need to impose in the Western world. And I think we're poorer for it, but that's just my opinion. And I'm not gonna pretend that these issues don't exist. I'm just saying that it's out of step with reality, right?
I think it's interesting to see how language in America determines so much, because I'm Brazilian, and so like my parents are both Brazilian, like I know the culture, I speak, right? Like everything, the music, all of that. And it's interesting to see how, like in Brazil, like you said, if someone is trained to play guitar, it's not classical guitar. There's no like in Portuguese, it's not violão clássico, it's just violão. So it's like you get to play a bunch of different genres and it's not secluded. But here in the United States, everything, even when you try to learn something, like when you want to learn how to play guitar, it's like, oh, okay, you can learn how to play classical guitar or urban or like all these, like, I don't know, it's weird.
It is weird, but I mean, I know I get caught up in it as a teacher as well. The one thing that students know with absolute certainty, they don't know quite what they want to learn, but they know for sure they don't want to learn classical guitar. So I mean, what can I do? So I just succumb to the snobbery, and I don't call it classical. I call it nylon guitar, or acoustic guitar, or fingerstyle guitar, or anything but classical. That word I can't use because that's, you know. But I mean, the same thing. So here we are. I'm sorry to burn off time, but I think maybe it's an important discussion. Who knows, right? I mean, it's undoubtedly an important discussion. I just don't know if it should take place in this part of the class. But we'll get there, right? But I can feel now you're mentioning that, Lauren. It's the same thing. I would like, for instance, if I feel slightly cornered or pigeonholed as a white guy, I would quite often make a distinction by saying I'm Scandinavian, meaning that that's an ethnic area that is not associated with this awful British Empire stuff that we all, you know, are living through the aftermath of the British Empire, don't we? You know, or the Portuguese, right? I mean, the Portuguese were any bit as colonial and ruthless as the Brits and the Dutch, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, they're very, very, and the Spanish, for crying out. It's just that it's a little longer ago. And in the case of my culture, we were also colonialists, right? But it was back in the 7th and 8th century. And so the Vikings, what did they do? I mean, they didn't colonize Africa or the New World. They colonized Britain, right? and the Faroe Islands and whatever. I'm not saying that as, you know, it's just a different culture. And because it's so long ago, it's not the most prominent or most recent phenomenon of a power move by a racial group, right?
Can I say something, Professor?
Yes, absolutely.
Because I was thinking, like, I feel like the like knowing where the music comes from, like knowing the culture, like how this music came about is like really important. And like, but I don't know how to say it. It's kind of like there's like a fine line of like respecting the culture, but also allowing other people to partake in the culture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like you can't just say like, oh, because you're a white guy, you can't play like jazz or something. Like, no, you should respect the people that made it and know the background and like, yeah, but also be open to allowing other people to embrace that culture and see like how do they like it, you know?
Yeah.
I completely agree, but I think it's also like You could say the same thing about like a Black person playing classical music. Like I think because it's like that label of like classical.
Here's the thing. I know what you're saying, Lauren. I don't think it goes the other way, because Black people have been forced to live in white cultures for
That's what I'm saying.
at least 400 years, right?
Mhm.
So it's not the same. The culture doesn't represent the same idea of race as, let's say, for instance, if I pretended to be a rapper. I mean, first of all, I'll be laughed off stage, right? Because I'm not.
Hurt you.
I mean, if you have some bars, I mean, I don't know.
Listen, if he got bars, I'm with him.
It's not in the hand movements. It's not in anything. It is a cultural expression that one has to respect, of course. But I mean, you're right to an extent. It's just that I think that's what we call a false equivalence. You know, say, oh, so does that mean that Black people can't play Mozart? No, it does not.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what society had put out into society, because just like Preach said, like he came into the school having a different mindset, where it's like classical music was only for a type of person, which is not true. That's the reality that I think we should break down in the United States, where it's like, I think different minorities have been oppressed for so long and been excluded for so many things.
Yeah.
That now it's like, I think it's very important that we be adamant in letting everybody know that everybody could do anything that they want to do, you know? For the minorities. What?
Yeah. The good news, as far as I'm concerned, is that what Angelica just said a moment ago is the attitude that most people seem to have, who, you know, whose let's say, whose future and job prospects are not tied into some sort of radical theory, because we must also understand that many of the reasons why people are proposing these kind of radical ideas is to set themselves apart from their colleagues, you know. And how do you gain attention? Well, you very often that takes place by attacking somebody who's already famous, you know, and suggesting that, let's say, somebody like a music theorist, for instance, that we celebrated for centuries, if I can take that person down, already I've gained some notoriety. And if I keep doing it, and if I do it intelligently enough, and if I write papers that are convincing, et cetera, maybe I can get tenure at my university. I mean, we shouldn't be blind to the power move in these kind of ideas, and how people project themselves into a culture war that is fueled by emotion rather than fact, right? I mean, we see the same in the political arena. If you can get people to suspend with their natural judgment and say, you know, you're being duped, this is being stolen from you, or whatever, right? If you say it long enough and forcefully enough, you know, if I really feel it in my bone that that's how it is, then people might believe me.
Yep.
And so there's a incredible conviction in people who are willing to die for their ideas, but the idea may be stupid nevertheless. And I, for one, is not going to just say, I admire you just because you're willing to die. I mean, that in itself is not enough for me. I understand that being level-headed and being fair and open-minded and all that, I understand that is not as sexy as somebody who is out there, you know, banging down a door and is willing to sort of get maimed and kill other people for their beliefs. I mean, the passion is quite palpable. And when we watch it on TV, we're sort of feeling, oh, this is like phenomenal entertainment. I'm not talking about myself. I don't watch TV, by the way. I don't have one, you know, but I, you know, so I'm very selective. I choose to read, so I understand the dynamic behind it, but that doesn't make it right. The fact that people believe very, very passionately about some idea doesn't make it right. And the fact that I may feel, but Chopin is a great composer, you know, and everyone should play him. That means nothing other than that's just your opinion. And back to this. What I'm saying is that the bass, because it came from that, the bass provides the basis upon which we're hearing the other notes. I think that's true to say. No matter what those notes are, I can craft a very, very elaborate structure on top, right? I can really go to town on that, and I can. Got to get back to my guitar again here. and in my, so I'm not saying that decoration or design is not important. I'm not saying that, because it may be very, very, very important. I mean, like the spices we put in food are not unimportant, right? But they depend on the substance of the dish itself. I mean, I might say that that one is a consonant chord, and I believe it is. And I may say that this one is a consonant chord, but it only depends on what kind of context I have in it. And I might even say that they're the same chord, because I can relate them. They make me feel the same way, you know. Or if that one is somewhat more fluid, right? And the wonderful thing about music is that it can be nebulous. Do you know what that word means? It means like foggy, meaning not clear in intention. And most often, in fact, when we're expressing ourselves, let's say just a completely natural sentence. I meet you on the street and I say, "How are you?" And you say, "Well, I'm fine." You know, you have. You're not meant to go into a long discussion about, you know, you're just meant to say, "I'm good," or "Things could be better," or whatever. You know, that's the sort of summary of things, that all things considered, I'm more good than not good. So you say, "I'm fine," you know, and you can hear it in the tone of the voice. "Oh, I'm fine." "Oh, I'm fine," right? It's the same sentence, but it's delivered differently, right? So we understand that they mean two different things. I think there's probably in this class or another class that I mentioned that a very, very large aspect of, if you're an advertising person, you know, you work in advertising, is the tone of voice. It's the sound of things, right? You know, two guys discussing cars say, "Volvo's the greatest car ever made." So, really? Right? That mean, I don't think so. Right? Is it really? The same word, the delivery, the inflection is very different, and it conveys so many more things than you can just read on it. That's why, you know, quite honestly, guys, I've never really learned anything from a book, you know, because I just haven't. But at the same time, because my background is so very, very different to many of my colleagues, you know, I've had so many situations where I've seen myself reflected in a different set of circumstances. And I've learned a lot more from what I could infer from those experiences, right? And then I put it all together, you know, but it's not like, I haven't studied any theory as, you know, I mean, music theory, yes, but I mean, any theory of human behavior as such. Sometimes I dabble, I read an article, or I read a book or something like that, and I find it interesting. But I mean, most often I see that people are trying to force the proof into confirming whatever theory they posited in the first place. And then I lose interest completely, because life, whatever you may say about it, is more complex than that. That's all I can say. That no matter what you say about it, there will be a level of complexity that you haven't quite accounted for in your view or in your theory, because that's human nature, basically. We are quite a complex species when it comes to it, right? And the way our interactions have developed, and the level of information that we give one another is making it more and more complex. And there are more and more possibilities these days that you have to take into account. I mean, again, you know, when my daughter was applying, I mean, she's just finished that whole exercise, applying for colleges, right? And there was this sort of box that you have to check, what ethnicity are you? I mean, she's other, right? And most of her friends are other. I mean, you know, my mom is Japanese, my father is, you know, from Guatemala or whatever. It's like, that's the typical New York mix, isn't it? that you're not just one thing. Just like classical musicians, I again, and I'm glad that Chris did that for you, Preach, because it's just this stigma of people. You know, I mean, when I get a new student, or especially children, I mean, or when they're young enough, they don't really know, they don't care, you know, they just want to play, right? You know, but as soon as they're past the age of 10, the first thing they know is that certainly they don't want to play classical guitar, that's for sure, because that really sucks. And then you become boring, and pretty soon you can't dance anyway, right? And you're never going to get a date. I mean, there's a whole bunch of sort of life expectancies that you're supposed to submit to if you play classical guitar, right? First of all, you want to play the electric guitar. That's for darn sure, right? Or something with steel strings. Although they're cutting my fingers now, you sort of endure the worst of it, even if it's completely non-productive, and even if all the arguments in the world would not dissuade you, because the stigma of saying to your friends, play this guitar, it has like nylon strings on it. They say, yo, classical guitar. Then you will never have a date. You know, the girls are going to shun you like the plague forever, or the boys or whatever. Anyway, so I think that was a little exploration about what does it mean. Inversion means what is in the bass, because we hear all the other notes based on what is the lowest sounding note. That's not something that I've invented. That's simply just the way our ears apparently work. You know, it seems that if my intonation goes up, we've just decided that really, that means tell me more, or I'm willing to accept your arguments, or really, that means no, I don't think so, right? And if I say, I'm good, we hear the intonation way before we hear and analyze what the person is saying. I'm good, right? It's not just pitch; it's also the cue in the language, how we deliver it, and all the other things. How do you I'm all right, right? Or as Seinfeld, you know, if you ever watched that '90s show, right? It's still funny, I think. He said, you know, he said if you're touching your face, and the higher up you go, the worse it is. How's your new relationship? It's all right, right? And said, how's your new relationship? It's okay. Or the ultimate, right? As you did. So how's your new girlfriend or boyfriend? I gotta get out. So the higher up in your face you touch yourself, the more of a giveaway. Not really the words that you're saying, but in other words, the non-verbal cues, right, are much more important. Okay, so how about that? What I'm going to do now, so first inversion is this one here, right? We understand that we're sort of going to do away with that a little bit, and say that we're going to really truly invert things. That means that this one here, that when we have a root position chord, what we want to do is that we want to put the chordal third on top of it. Yeah. And your first exercise that I'll send out later today is just going to do a whole bunch of chords like this. And then first inversion would do the opposite, meaning, and we just import this sort of the glue in the middle, which is the chordal fifth. Okay. That's basically it. And we can see that the outer voice is doing what we call voice exchange. That's where we came from. Voice exchange. And you will find that this is almost regardless of style. You will find that that most of the harmonization observation that you can make will somehow deal with this as a reality. I'm not going to deal with second inversion chords because they relate, as we just talked about, they relate to a different root, really. Whatever you have in the bass tends to become the root of that chord. That is not true for first inversion chords, but it is true for second inversion triads, right? If I were to write this up in 4 parts, I'll do it like this. Oops. So now we see that we are opening up the field a little bit here. That should have been that one here. So if I have a root position chord, I will just double the bass. That's the easiest way to do it. And I'll have the chordal third on top here. And if I have a first inversion chord, I will keep all of this stuff here. And now I will have, you see, two roots here and two roots here. That's a good reinforcement. And your first exercise, and I'm just going to spell this out as the example, and then you're going to do it in different keys and in different types of chords. So what if I had say this is a C major triad right now, right? And this is a C major over E. We'll come back to, let's say next time we meet, what this is called in more technical language. Right now, this is good enough, right? And this is preach.
You said the last one is a C major over E?
Yeah.
That's an E on the bottom?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah. Because I've got E in the bottom and because this whole stack can be reduced to this. The only three notes I have in either chord would be C, E, and G. You see, here's a C, another C, that's just a C, right? E and G. The same thing here, I'm just starting from E this time. So I don't call the chord E something. I would understand that it's still a C major triad, but now it's just in first inversion. So C over E, yeah? And if I were to say C minor, all I would have to do is to change the chordal third, this one here, into that one. And if I said C diminished, so that would be, the other one here would be C minor over E flat, right? We would understand that. If I were to change this label here to C diminished, I would have to reduce or lower the chordal fifth. That's luckily the same in both cases here. So it's all good, right? We understand that this is easy to understand. And if I were to go the other way, so to speak, by saying, what about an augmented? Because now I've done major, minor, and diminished. What if I say augmented? What if I said this chord here? Then what I'll have to do is just to raise the fifth in both cases, and everything else will stay the same. Because now I have C to E, major third, and E to G sharp, major third, two major thirds on top of each other. So let's hammer this in some homework, and hopefully Professor Margaret will follow up, maybe not with the cultural discussion, but certainly the mechanics of how this fits on the keyboard. Okay. All right, guys. Thanks for indulging me. I think these are important discussions. We actually covered everything that I wanted to cover in this lesson, regardless. And thanks for your contributions. I really, this is one of the reasons why it's fun to teach, because you get to hear, you get to file the corners of your own opinions by that of other students. And I have a daughter who's 18, and it's really important to not grow stuck. The older you get, you can mistakenly think that, oh, now I know everything there is to know. You'll never know. And the same goes for you guys too, right? That you'll never know everything there is to know. Because once you do know certain things, it will be infused by other facts that you have to take into account. And that either scares you or it makes it worth living, right? Or some combination of the two, right? Okay, so enough for me, and see you, what is it? Actually, that will be it for this week. Wednesday you're having Professor Carlos, right? Yeah, so see you next Monday. I'll send out a little exercise with this example and just do it in different keys that I'll specify. Okay?
Is the homework gonna be due Monday or like the day before Monday? How's that gonna work?
let's just say it's due Monday. Is that okay? Is that enough time? Okay. Yeah, I don't think I overload students with homework. I think it's more important to get this right in class, and then we just reinforce with homework, right? So we're able to do this by ourselves.
Cool.
Okay, guys, have a great week. See you Monday.
Thank you,
Bye.
Professor.
Thank you, Professor. God bless.
And God bless you too.